Hello, I'm so happy to join you this afternoon, and I wish that I could be with you in person, but I'm so grateful that technology allows me to record and present this workshop for you, and I hope that we will be able to interact online in the future following this workshop. Today's workshop is titled Setting Up Students to Succeed. First, I wanted to briefly introduce myself. My name is Heidi Healy, and I was a fellow in China, an English language fellow in China for 2.5 years. I was up in the northeast part of China at Northeast Normal University and down in central China at Central China Normal University. While I was a fellow in China, I had the opportunity to travel to Mongolia about 3 times to participate in TESOL conferences and other teacher training opportunities. I was always very impressed by the teachers in Mongolia, by their desire and willingness to learn and to become better English language teachers. I have always been very interested in the areas of reading, writing, and grammar, and these are some of my favorite areas to teach. Personally, I am from Utah in the western part of the United States, and I love being from Utah. Utah has beautiful mountains and beautiful natural places to visit, and it's one of my favorite things that I can quickly and easily be in the mountains where I enjoy hiking and sightseeing and spending time with my family and friends. So I want to start today by just giving you a little bit of time to think. And I think it's always important to reflect as you attend these different workshops with me. If you attend workshops with me in the future, I like to give people time to think. So I'd like you to start today by just reflecting on, why did you come to this Wednesday workshop? Just take about 30 seconds and think about, why are you here? In addition to asking you to reflect and think, it's also important to be friendly with the other teachers that are participating. And so I would like you to also introduce yourself to the other teachers at your table or those teachers sitting around you, and briefly tell them why you came to the workshop today. Great. Finally, I want to share with you a little bit about my philosophy when it comes to teacher training. And that is that we all have a teacher toolbox. We all have a collection of strategies and methods and activities that we use when we're teaching English. And my goal today is that we can all walk away with a few more strategies, a few more ideas, or one more activity to add to our teacher toolbox. It might be something that I share. It might be something that one of your colleagues shares. Or maybe it's a new idea that you come up with. It's one of my favorite things about going to professional development, is getting new ideas from presenters, from the other participants, and also attending professional development just helps my brain get working so that I think of new ways to adapt things, or new things I can do with my students. So I hope today you will add to your teacher toolbox. So another question to think about. This presentation is called Setting Up Students for Success. So what does that mean? How do we get students to success? How do we achieve success? Take a minute and discuss this with the people at your table or a couple of people sitting near you. Great. I really wish that I could be there in person to hear your answers and respond more to them. I hope that maybe as you discussed how do we get to success, you looked at this graphic and you thought about some of the words we see here, words like planning and strategy, because I really think that these two words are important in determining success. We can't be successful and our students can't be successful unless we are making a plan and using specific strategies to be successful. These are all part of success. So today in this workshop, I'm going to list the steps in a model for classroom organization called the ROPES model. And then I'm going to invite you to apply the model to your lesson plans and to what you are currently teaching in your classes. So let's get started. First of all, ROPES is an acronym. It stands for review, overview, present, practice and produce, evaluate, and summarize. Just like in our picture here, this rope is helping our climber reach the top of this mountain. In our classrooms, having good classroom structure and organization helps our students be successful and meet their goals for English language learning. Let's discuss each one of these elements and how they can help us and how they can help our students and ourselves find success in English language teaching and learning. First of all, review. So as we go through this, I'm going to put up some key questions as we think about the point. So with review, one of the questions to ask is, how can I prepare the students to learn? This is often answered by suggesting that we do a warm-up. Warm-ups are great. They're a good way to get students involved and get ready for learning. We can make warm-ups even more powerful if, while warming up, we also review from a previous class, because this helps to create connections between things learned previously and things learned in the class now. And this is really powerful. We know in learning that making connections is one of the most important things we can do. So by reviewing each time we start class, we help students form these connections. This can be especially true in English classes, where you may only see your students once a week, or maybe 2 or 3 times a week. This helps students to remember the things they previously learned and apply them to the new lesson. A few things I might do to help students review could be review a question of the day, reviewing a task from the previous day, or possibly even reviewing a homework assignment that was given. Let's look at a few of these options. So one option is to ask a question of the day. When I was teaching in China, many times I would begin my classes, either writing classes or speaking classes, with a question of the day. This was an opportunity for students to practice developing fluency. It also gave them opportunity to express their own ideas in English. With writing, I might do something like, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. This might be the fluency prompt that I give my students after we've talked about introductions. So, for example, in the previous class on Monday, for example, we talked about writing an introduction to an essay. The following week, when my class met again, their fluency right for the beginning of class was, "You never get a second chance to make a first impression." I'm hoping that students will be thinking about what we talked about with introductions the previous week as they write this prompt. Another example might be to do some kind of a review task. Maybe we took a quiz the previous day in class. So for my review activity, I might have the students listen to the quiz context again and fix any questions they got wrong, and then review the phrases and information from the quiz. This might be a way to allow students to review information. It also connects to what we did previously. Another review task I might do is to do another practice activity or production activity related to a topic from a previous lesson. For example, if I see my students once a week, on week 14, maybe we discuss grammar and vocabulary to create cohesion and coherence in writing, such as using transition words and repeated words. The next week, maybe I start class by having students do a chain writing activity and practice using that repeated vocabulary and the transition words that we discussed previously. This creates connections or links between the learning. Let's take a minute and think about what we've discussed so far. So we've discussed using reviews in class, reviewing previous information. Do you do reviews in class each day, or do you mainly do a review before a test or exam? Think about how you use a review in your class, and then share a review activity or a warm-up activity that you have done with your group. Great. So you've shared some of the activities that you've done previously. Now I would like you to think of a lesson you are teaching this week. Choose a specific class or a specific lesson. We're going to use this throughout the workshop today. I want you to think of a review activity you could do at the beginning of the lesson. So for example, if you're teaching a class on Friday, what's a review activity you could do at the beginning of the lesson you are planning? Take a few minutes, think about a review activity, and then discuss with the people at your table. If you can't think of an idea, maybe the people at your table can help you come up with an idea. Excellent. One idea I thought of was maybe using a game to begin class to review a grammar principle that I had taught the previous week. I hope you shared some good ideas with each other. Our second step in our ropes model is overview. To create an overview, I need to think about what I want the students to learn in class each day. Sometimes this is more up to me, and sometimes I'm just following a textbook. Either is okay, but I still want to think about, at the end of class, what should the students be able to do with English. These might relate to my bigger objectives. They might also relate to my task list for the day. At the beginning of class, I want to give students a task or objective list so that they know what they're going to be doing in class. This helps students to be able to have that structure and know, okay, these are the things we're going to do in class. This also helps students to feel that class is planned and organized, which helps them have more trust and confidence in their teacher. For example, at the beginning of this workshop, I gave you my 2 objectives. Objective 1 is for you to be able to list the steps in the ropes model. And objective 2 is to apply the model to your lesson plan. So far, we've accomplished this for letter R. Letter R, if you remember, stands for review. And I asked you to write a review activity for a lesson plan you're teaching in the next week. This would be an example of using specific objectives. You might also give your students a task list, a list of activities or things you're going to talk about in class. For example, I teach a class at a local university. My students are all English language learners and come from several different countries. In my class, I teach reading, writing, listening, speaking, and grammar. Basically, I teach everything. So at the beginning of each class, I give my students an overview, a list of the things we're going to talk about in class. For example, in this class, we did some listening. We talked about some vocabulary words. Then we did some grammar. We did some more listening, and we ended with a class discussion. Again, giving my students a list like this helps them understand where we are going in class and gives structure and organization. Sometimes you won't finish everything in your list, and that's okay. You can always tell students, we didn't have time to do this activity, we will do it next time we meet. Or, since we didn't have time to do this activity, I'm going to give it to you as homework. Do you give your students an overview of your class? Do you tell them what they are going to learn in class? What about at the beginning of a semester? Do you help your students understand the goals for the class? What kind of things they will be learning? Take a couple of minutes and discuss these questions with your group. Excellent. I think it's really important to help students understand our expectations of them, what we expect them to be learning. And one of the ways we can communicate this is by giving students an overview of our class. Now, let's apply this to a lesson you're going to teach. Think about that lesson, the one that you did the review activity for. Now, for that class, what are the major activities or topics for the day? How would you list these as an overview for your class? And how would you communicate it to the students? Will you put it on the board? Will you put it on a PowerPoint slide? Take a minute, think about your overview. What are the major activities for your lesson? And how will you share it with the class? Then share that with your group. So far, we've talked about our first 2 steps in developing this good classroom organization. The first step is to review. Talk about the things we did previously. Connect it to the things we're going to do today. The second step is to overview. Help our students understand our goals and what they're going to learn and do during class. These two steps can be done fairly quickly. Your overview may only take a minute or two, and your review might only take a few minutes as well. Altogether, your review and overview should only take the first few minutes of class. Sometimes your review might be a little bit longer, but generally it's just a brief activity at the beginning. Our P in the word ropes stands for presentation, practice, and production. This is a common model for teaching in English, and that's really what the P is for. The P is for the presentation, the teaching. What are you doing in class today? So it should take up most of your class time. Let's talk a little bit more about each one of these areas. So first, present. When we present, we teach students material. Whatever it is that's in our curriculum or our textbook, whatever we need to cover for the day. For example, if I was teaching past tense, I might be teaching my students the regular past tense form of verbs in English. I could do this two ways. One, I could simply tell my students the rule. When we make past tense in English, we add ed to the end of a verb. I could then give my students some examples of different verbs where this is true, such as walked, talked, needed, jumped. Another thing I could do is I could give students some sentences in the past tense with regular past tense verbs and ask the students to look for the pattern. Students could then notice the pattern of adding ed to the ends of words. Either of these works as a model to present. After presenting the information, teaching the students about a given topic, I would want to have the students practice what I've been given them. Practice is when students use the language, but in a very controlled way, a way that I, the teacher, am helping them with. This could involve doing a choral chant. For example, maybe I say the verb in the present tense, or I say the verb, and the students repeat the verb back to me in the past tense. So I say walk, the students say walked. I say talk, students say talked. This could also happen in the form of a worksheet or another controlled practice, such that we often find in textbooks and curriculums. Our final step is to produce, to give students the opportunity to really use the language, especially in authentic ways. This may involve speaking or writing. Going back to my past tense example, after we've talked about the form and the grammar, practiced in a couple of different controlled ways, maybe I ask the students to write a few sentences about what they did over the weekend or over the summer. Or maybe I have them speak and tell what they did the past weekend or what they did over the summer. Either way, I'm asking the students to produce the language and use it in an authentic way. So I've moved from the teacher doing more of the talking to working together with my students, and finally having the students do more of the talking or work. So as I'm preparing to teach this way, the first thing I need to do is think about what do I need to present to my students? Obviously, I need to present the skill, the grammar, or the strategy that we are working on. But I also need to make sure that students understand the vocabulary and the background knowledge to be successful. Vocabulary can be taught in many ways, and whether I'm listening, speaking, reading, or writing, vocabulary is important. I might use translations, or pictures, or diagrams, or simple definitions. It really doesn't matter how I convey the information, but it's important the students know the important words. In addition to vocabulary, I want to make sure that students have the appropriate background knowledge. This is also sometimes called schema. Background knowledge is the information that we learn from our experiences reading, writing, and living. Some things we need more background knowledge, or we need different background knowledge than other things. So we build background knowledge through experience, through reading, listening, and explicit teaching. And this can be especially important when teaching languages, because our teaching materials may discuss a culture or a place that is different from our own. For example, if a reading or a listening is about life in the United States, you might need to explain some of what's happening to your students. Similarly, if you teach in a rural area and the reading is describing an urban area, or you teach in an urban area and the reading or listening is describing a rural area, you may need to give your students some information and make sure that they understand the background knowledge. They have the knowledge so they can be successful. Finally, I need to prepare the skill that I'm going to teach my students. As I said previously, this may be a grammar explanation, a reading strategy, a speaking strategy, or many other things that we teach as part of teaching English. And there are different ways to present our skill, but we want to make sure as teachers that we feel comfortable with this skill ourselves, that we've looked over the information and that we're ready to teach. The next two parts of present, practice, and produce I've put together. My key question here is, what do students need to practice and produce? It's very important in language learning that we're thinking about how to help our students practice and produce language. According to Krashen, most growth in language learning occurs at I+1. I+1 means when the information is just a little bit difficult. I is where your current ability is. I+1 is a little above your current ability. This helps us to grow. In doing activities that slightly challenge our students, we want to carefully structure activities to slowly allow students to take control. First, we help the students do it. We engage in guided practice. And then we gradually let the students take more and more control until they're ready to use the language on their own. Also, it's good when learning languages to repeat activities, because automaticity, the ability to do something easily and automatically, is built through repeated practice. I want my students to be fluent writers, they need lots of practice to write. If I want them to be fluent speakers, they need lots of speaking practice. So I want to make sure that as I design my class, I'm building in opportunities for students to practice and produce language. Let's talk a little bit about practice. What might practice look like? Practice is often a teacher and students working together, or students doing very controlled practice. For example, filling in the blanks in their textbook or on a worksheet. In that kind of an example, students only have to focus on one thing, what goes in the blank. It might also involve doing drills or repeatedly practicing specific skills. For example, practicing the irregular past tense forms of verbs in English. I could say the regular form and have the students say the irregular past tense. For example, sleep, slept, run, ran, etc. It might also involve focused practice. For example, when I was teaching a writing class, I noticed my students needed extra practice on writing thesis statements. So we spent several times having students brainstorm and write a thesis. Brainstorm and write a thesis. Brainstorm and write a thesis. We might practice with our students. We might also assign our students to work in groups and practice while we walk around and give feedback. Production. When it comes to produce, students produce language or do a skill on his or her own. Often this takes the form of speaking or writing. So for example, with my past tense example, after we've practiced using the past tense verb, then I give my students the opportunity to write or speak using the past tense. Briefly, I would also again like to mention repetition. Repetition is important because it again helps students to build automaticity, meaning it makes the language easy to produce and it makes it more automatic for them, so they don't have to think about it as much. Some repetition activities might include things like fluency activities such as repeated readings, having students read the same passage several times. Fluency writing, have the students write about the same topic several times. Speaking fluency, having the students speak about the same topic with different partners. And also specific skill practice, like we might find in drills, such as I showed earlier with learning irregular past tense verbs. Now let's look at a few examples. Let's imagine that I'm teaching a class and I'm focusing on speaking, and we've been working on learning more about other people. So we're focusing on the question form, we're focusing on using the question, do you like? So first of all, I teach the students the form. Do you like? For the verb, I follow it with the to form of the verb. Do you like to swim? Do you like to watch movies, etc.? Then perhaps I have the students complete a worksheet with the questions. maybe something out of the textbook, or maybe I have another worksheet I've prepared for them where they complete or fill in blanks. Finally, I move on to the produce section. In this section, I'm going to have the students play a human bingo game and have them practice asking each other the question, do you like? Do you like ice cream? Do you like to travel? Do you like to go hiking? The game might look something like this. The students stand up, they move around the room and ask their classmates, do you like? And then we have them write the name of their classmate on the line. After they have found classmates that respond yes to these questions, we might have students report on what they learned about their classmates. So they learned about the question, do you like? They did a worksheet to practice and help them make that form more comfortable. And finally, they did a game to practice using that language, producing it and using it in a conversation with their classmates. Another example might take place in a writing class. Perhaps I want to teach my students how to write a topic sentence. I start by presenting the information. Maybe we look at a couple of short paragraphs in our textbook with the topic sentence. We underline the topic sentence. We talk about what a topic sentence is and why it's important in writing in English. Then I give my students some practice. I give them a paragraph without a topic sentence, and we work together as a class, teacher and students, to write a topic sentence for this paragraph. Maybe I do that for another paragraph or two. Finally, I ask students to try it on their own, or maybe try it in groups, depending on my students. I give them a couple of paragraphs and ask them to write the topic sentence. This could vary depending on your students. Maybe first, I want them to have more practice identifying the topic sentence before they try writing it. But the idea here again, as you'll notice, we're moving from the teacher doing more of the work to the students doing more of the work at the end of the process. Do you use a model similar to this in your class? In your class, who does most of the talking and working? Do you find that you do a lot of the talking and your students do most of the listening? Or do you help your students produce language? Take a couple minutes and talk with your group. There are many different models out there for teaching English, so your model might look a little bit different from mine. I think one of the most important things here is to consider this last step. Are your students having the opportunity to produce language, to read, to speak, to listen, to write, and use the language? Because that's really the best way that they will learn it. Let's go back to that lesson we've been working on, the one that you already developed a review activity and an overview for. Think about how you could use this present, practice, produce model in teaching your class. For example, if I was teaching past perfect, I might teach the form, have the students do a fill in the blank activity in their textbook, and then have them write 3 sentences about last weekend using past perfect. How could you use this model in one of your classes in the coming week. Thank you for sharing your ideas with your group. I hope as you listen to one another, if you hear a good idea, you will ask for more details so that you can try something new in your class. Remember what I said about the toolbox. It's a collection of ideas, strategies, and activities that we can use in class. It might be something that we get from another teacher, or you get from me, or it might be something we come up with on our own. We're now to the fourth step in our process. So we review, we overview, we teach the material for our class, and our next step is evaluate. Now, before we talk a little bit more about evaluate, I want to make sure to remind you that evaluate doesn't have to only come at the end. It might come as we go through the practice and production stage. I'm going to be evaluating while my students are practicing, so I know if they are ready to produce. For example, if we're working on past tense, and as my students are completing their worksheet, I notice they are struggling with the idea of past tense. I would want to do more practice with them before moving on to a production activity. This is why it's important to always be evaluating your students. To evaluate the students means that you know the students met the goal or objective. This could be very simple. It could just be the goal or objective for class that day. It might be as simple as students know how to form the regular past tense of regular verbs using the ed ending. And also evaluating doesn't mean that I have to give the students a formal test. Usually it means other ways of evaluating, of knowing that my students are learning. I want to talk about being an informed teacher and also using self-evaluation. First of all, be an informed teacher. What does this mean? This is one of my favorite pictures of a teacher. I got it from the internet. But I really enjoy it because in this picture, this teacher is standing in the middle of his classroom. He's not standing at the front. He's standing in the middle. He's standing where he can see the work his students are doing. He can give them correction. He can give them suggestions if they need it. He also knows where the class needs extra work or extra help. Maybe there's a word that everyone is spelling wrong. Well, he can see that in the middle of class and help his students fix that error early, instead of waiting, collecting all the work, and maybe not getting back to his students until the next day or the next class session. To be an informed teacher, you can also use checklists as well as self-evaluation. Using a checklist can be a helpful way to remember the things that you're noticing as a teacher. Some of you teach many students, and it might be difficult to remember the information you learned about each student. So creating a checklist can help you remember that information. For the objective, I might list students use the past tense, the ed ending, to form the regular past tense of regular verbs. The assessment is the students are going to talk about what they did on the weekend. And I'm going to listen for past tense of regular verbs. Now, it's important to note the focus here. I'm not focusing on irregular verbs. I'm not focusing on making sure their sentence structure is perfect or their grammar or their pronunciation is perfect. I'm only focusing on regular past tense verbs. I would write the name of the students here, and then I can just mark a check mark for how the students did. Did the students use all the correct past tense verbs in the regular, and they used irregular past tense verbs? They exceeded the objective. Did students use all regular past tense verbs? Great. Even if they missed a couple of irregular past tense verbs, or maybe the pronunciation wasn't quite right, they still met the objective or the goal. Maybe I had a student who most of the verbs were in the regular past tense, but a few verbs were not. So I could say this student is approaching the objective. And finally, if I had a student that I noticed didn't use the past tense, I would mark that this student did not complete the assessment or the objective. This helps me as a teacher to know how my class is doing. And all I did was walk around and listen to my students while they talked. It happened during class, so it didn't take any extra time, and it helps me to inform my teaching. Another way of being an informed teacher is through self-assessment, asking the students to assess their own understanding. There's a couple of ways you can do this. One is through the use of color cards, giving the students small pieces of paper colored red, yellow, and green. Red means I need lots of help. Yellow means, can you slow down? I need some help. Green means, I understand and I can do it. Let's keep going. Throughout my lesson, I may ask my students, how are you feeling? If needed, I could ask this question to them in Mongolian. How are you feeling about the lesson today? Do you feel red? We need to stop and slow down and talk more about it? Do you feel yellow? I need a few more examples. Or are you feeling like you're green? You understand and you are ready to use this new part of English. Sometimes I don't have color cards for my students, so I use a thumbs up. In English, in American English, thumbs up means good or okay. Thumbs down means bad. So I have my students show me how they're feeling, good or bad. And I give them a third option with their thumb in the middle. Most of the time, I have my students hold their thumb under their chin. This way, it's not as obvious to the rest of the class. I can see it, the student knows what they're doing, but it can be more of a secret from other students. I might ask questions such as the following. Did you understand the listening? Thumbs up means, yes, I understood the listening. I am good. Did you understand the listening? Thumbs down means, no, maybe I want to listen again. Or thumb in the middle means, I understood part of it, but not all of it. I like to use this question to help me evaluate how many times to play a listening in my class. I may ask my students, did you understand the listening? And then I look at the signal they give me. That helps me to decide, yes, I need to play the listening again, or no, the students are good, we're ready to move on. I could ask similar questions like, can you use the past tense in English? I feel good about it? No? Sometimes. Do you understand the vocabulary words? Yes. No. Some of them. Again, this can help me better understand how my students are progressing in class. I could also use colors or even smiley faces. Have students draw pictures of smiley faces that they can hold up, or even just put in the corner of their desk. For example, if while I'm teaching, I can tell the students to put a red frowny face in the corner of the desk if they're confused. As the teacher, I can watch for red frowny faces to get placed on desks. And this tells me I need to adjust my teaching. Finally, I might have my students use their bodies or their heads to show their understanding. Sometimes this works well for beginners or shy students because they don't need to talk. It's similar to a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but I can gain more information. Let me give you an example of how this might work. Maybe we've been talking about vocabulary and we've been talking about different kinds of geography. To review vocabulary, I might write a word like mountain with a picture. Is this a mountain? If the answer is yes, students face the right wall. If the answer is no, students face the left wall. So the answer here would be yes, this is a mountain. I could make things a little more complicated. Show students a picture and ask, what is it? If it is a waterfall, you face front. A mountain, face right. A reef, face back. Or a canyon, face left. I then watch while my students move to face the direction. I could do this having the students sitting down, or it could be an opportunity to let my students stand up, take a little break, move a little bit to get their brains re-engaged in learning. So here's our example. What is it? A waterfall, a mountain, a reef, or a canyon? The correct answer, of course, is a reef. So I would face the back of the room. Now, you may be thinking, but Heidi, the students will just copy each other. If one or two students in the class know the answer and turn to face the back, the other students will just copy them. Yes, that is true. But that's okay, because as a teacher, you are watching. You are seeing who moves quickly and who moves much more slowly. Maybe even who picks one answer and then switches to a different answer. By watching our students, it can help us know, oh, everyone turned very quickly and got the answer right. They understand what a reef is. Or, everyone moved slowly and there are many different answers. We still need to review the vocabulary. These kinds of assessments help me better understand what I need to help my students with. It helps me prepare them for the test so they can be more confident. And as a teacher, I can be more confident that my students will do well on the exam or on the test. So how do you assess students? What kinds of activities or things do you do in class to help you know how your students are learning? Take a couple minutes and discuss with your group. Now, what strategies will you use, not test? Maybe one of the techniques we talked about, I talked about, maybe one of the techniques someone in your group mentioned. How will you make sure that your students have learned the material from class for one day? What kinds of things might you do? Take a few minutes and share with your group. Great. Again, I hope that you gained some great ideas from your class, from your other participants, from your fellow teachers. Another one of my favorite things to do with students is to have them do what is called an exit ticket. In an exit ticket, I might have students write down some answers to some questions on a little piece of paper, or answer a single question and give me the piece of paper at the end of class. Or maybe I ask the students a question at the end of class as they leave the classroom and have them respond appropriately to me. There are many different ways that you can do exit tickets. Our last step is to summarize. This is the way to end class, and it's going to be very short and brief. When you summarize at the end, you just want to briefly review the key points from the lesson. You may also preview the next lesson. So today, we've talked about the ropes model for organizing a classroom. We start with a review to talk about things that were covered in the previous class. We overview so that students know what to expect for class that day. They know the kinds of tasks and things they're going to do. Then we present, we practice, and we help students produce language. Sometimes we might do all three. Sometimes we might focus more on one than the other. For example, maybe one day in class, we do a lot more presenting, and then the next day in class, our students do more production. It depends on the topic we're teaching and the needs of our students. We evaluate all along the process, and then also after students have produced language, we want to be evaluating in informal ways so we can give students good feedback, and so we as teachers know the things we still need to work on and teach our students. And finally, at the end of class, we take a minute to briefly summarize. This helps to bring things back to the memory so that students can remember the things that we've practiced and done during class. So, in your class that you've been working on during the workshop, what are the most important things you want students to remember? What are the things you need to summarize at the end of class? I want to thank you for meeting with us here today, for participating, for sharing with your groups. And I want to thank those that have facilitated these sessions and set up the technology. So many efforts and good work have gone into making this workshop a success. So thank you for being here, for your participation, and thank you for all of those that helped with setup and facilitation to make today a successful workshop. I would like to end with returning to the idea of the teacher toolbox. My final question is, what did you add to your toolbox today? What new idea or strategy do you want to try in your classroom? Maybe it's something I shared. Maybe it's something another teacher shared. Take a few minutes here at the end to reflect on what you added to your teacher toolbox today. Again, thank you so much for being here. I hope that I will see you again at another workshop about good teaching practices. Have a great evening.